Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to view Doghouse from 2009. So, gotta state, after the first 20 to 23 minutes of this movie, the movie eventually does win me over. There is some kind of like macho, manly stuff that kind of goes on to this film that's kind of like, blah. But kind of once you get past the first 20 minutes, you eventually get won over by this movie. Because at some point we have these zombies that have these kind of like unique things about them, and like it feels that there's a lot of time to kind of put these characters together and so on and so forth. So with that said, what is the setup of this film? So we have a character named Vince who is going through a divorce, and because of course of his uh, friends realizing that, they decide that they want to go on and put together a boys' weekend and see to it that they go to a place where the ratio of men and women are to be, for every one man, there's like four women. So we have our guys making it to this boys' weekend, and come to find out, once they get to this town called Moodley, they realize that all of a sudden all the women there are to oddly start to become zombified or zombies. And so these guys try to strategize and figure out a way to hopefully save their own skin, or to try to save their friends, to eventually start to see, the further and further we get into this film, that some people are to get killed and often whatever. So we go on in this movie and have the zombies, who are, of course, to all be female, and we have them with like these unique things about them. Like one of them is to be this kind of bride zombie that has this axe. We have the hairstylist zombie with these scissors, and so on and so forth. Every bit of every one of them is to be fairly unique. We also have this kind of like hair curler, heavier set zombie that is to also just kind of give us a really interesting show. That I was like, all right, like, man, like, someone is really like flaunting what she's got. But then so we have me just feel like this isn't like a run of the mill zombie film. And so with that said, I was definitely go on and feel like this movie deserves like a okay or a solid okay. Like I'm kind of debating back and forth because that first 20 minutes though. Uh, but yeah, but I would recommend going on and seeing it. Where can you go on and find this film? You can go on and rent it somewhere, but I can also give you an app that you can hopefully dare in fact watch this movie for free. So the app, of course, that I would recommend is an app called Vidlessy, Vidlesy, or possibly Vodlessy, Vodlesy. Justifiably, if you can find one or the other, hopefully you can still find that app and dare in fact be able to watch Doghouse for absolutely free, unless you want to pay a fee to rent it, which is perfectly okay, because at the end of the day, I gave this a solid okay. So with that said, I think it's about that time to go into spoilers and really just kind of talk about this film. In all honesty, I was to go on and, for the most of the point, like until we get to the actual Moodley town, I was to go on and take some kind of notes of sort. Then once we actually get to the town, I kind of threw that aside. And I was like, oh, you know what? Like, I'm just going to go on and just kind of, like, whatever I can tell you is whatever I can tell you. Like, whatever I retained is whatever I retained. At some point, I might kind of go back to other scenes. But either way, I'm going to just try to, like, recant as much as I could. So with that said, let's go on into that double five time territory because about that time you'd again to of course go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we can do spoil this review. Like I know I should probably like kind of do a much more kind of like unscripted whatever things, but I think a lot of times people are like, no, like I like the scripted things a lot better because there's either certain times where people are like, yeah, you should really go on and do a scripted review because a lot of times like you're just winging it just really sucks and it's like, like oh well, like that was kind of whatever I did that day. Um, but also there's just quite often times where it's just like, well, like it was whatever I did, however I felt, and whichever. So, or really, I just probably didn't care that day. It's like, I don't care about this movie or this show, this whatever, or a lot of times it's just like, I do this too often. So, with that said, let's go on into this movie. So, at the very beginning of it, we find an alarm clock is to wake up Vince, and we kind of find that Vince is a slob of a character as he has just kind of food just kind of right next to his bed. And we like even have like a smear of some like food residue. I was kind of surprised by the like the budget of this film, especially when they like take the bus and they just kind of go crashing through all these like fences and all these things. I'm like, man, like this movie seems to have quite a bit of a budget to blow, and I was very surprised by that. So, we all of a sudden have Vince getting a phone call from Neil, and Vince does not go on and answer it. So, Neil is to all of a sudden get hit by a shoe via the woman that he is with, because this woman is to kind of just be in her robe with her undergarments on, and she's going on and complaining to Neil. It's like, well, hey, I'm not just some hooker that you can kind of just kind of play around with and then just kind of leave. And we have Neil that's like, well, like here's the thing, like I don't even know what your name is. I don't even know who you are. So we have Neil that kind of is to kind of trip over this fence, and so he walks back to his car and is to say like how great he is because Neil seems to consistently say it's like women love me and this and that. So next up we go on to a guy named Graham who is talking to his partner, his significant lover, who is of course also another guy. So we have in this argument between this couple, we are to get kind of the setup story if we haven't from any of the other characters. So Graham sets up that this is to be like the boys' weekend, and Graham's boyfriend is just kind of set up or setting up that it's like, well, like like out of light to have gotten like an invite or something, like why can't I just go with you? And so Graham is like, well, it's not like I'm ditching my mates for a girlfriend. Like no, like it's not the same thing. Like Graham is ditching his lover for his mates. So we have Graham that is to say to his partner, it's like, well, hey, there's no girls allowed, darling, and he kisses and leaves. So we have Mikey that is talking to his significant lover, and so Mikey is saying it's like, well, hey, there's not gonna be any strippers, like I'm gonna be in charge this time around, and Mikey's gonna be at his granddad's for the weekend, and Mikey's girl is saying it's like, well, like by the time that you get back by the weekend, like I'm gonna change the locks, and so Mikey is telling his girl it's like, well, hey, I'm only doing this for Vince, and so we have Mikey's girl who's wanted to kind of take off her wedding ring because she's going to be doing some things while Mikey's out. And Mikey's like, well, here's the thing. Like, I knew that you were going to try that, so I super glued your wedding ring onto your finger. Like, good luck taking that off. So, next up, we have Patrick. Patrick is having his woman yelling at him about how he's to have gone on and needed to take this retreat to rediscover his balls. So Patrick is to go on and put in these kind of earbuds or headphones or whatever on, and is to kind of adjust his iPod to be listening to this calming, soothing, like track on his iPod to try to calm him down. So while Patrick leaves the room, we have his woman just kind of take this glass item and chuck it behind him and break it against this door as he leaves. So, next up we have next up we have Vince, who is putting his lighter on this this scaffolding, or this this kind of like front door like balcony. And so he goes on and goes back into his place, and or like it's kind of like a railing in front of his place, like it's a like an apartment complex. So we then go to this comic book store where Matt is bickering with this little kid, and they're talking about the hero symbol, and that also when the kid is like, oh, okay, well, like, then why does he go on and get attacked by these zombies in page 4? And Matt's like, I told you for I don't know how many times, these monsters are not to be zombies. So finally, Matt is to ask this kid, it's like, well, hey, do you want to buy this comic book or not? And so the kid is like, well, of course not. Like, this comic book is stupid. It's garbage. And so Matt is like, well, great. Like, go ahead and just get out of here because I'm closing early. And so the kid leaves, and then he comes back and tosses an egg in front of the comic book store and gives Matt the finger. So Vince ends up getting grabbed by his guys, and we have Mikey, I believe, that ends up kind of picking up the Vince's lighter and kind of takes them away here. So we have every single one of the men's loved one or whichever. We have them all state the word bastard to say that Neil is one, or Vince is one, or no, Mikey's one, Patrick is, so on and so forth. Like, they recite this so often. So we have all the guys make their way to this bar called the Old King's Head. So that's where they're kind of to supposedly meet together. So we have all the guys that are kind of getting this drink. Whoops. And so we have Neil that is trying to hit on this bartender, but I guess he says something fairly offensive, to then have the bartender chuck this drink into Neil's face, but Neil dodges it, and Matt gets hit with it. So we have Neil that asks, where's Banksley? And so come to find out, they end up kind of writing him off as like, well, Banksley's always late. It's like, well, he wasn't late for his wedding. Come to find out, Banksley was on time for his wedding, but his bride wasn't. So much so that his bride didn't even show up to the wedding. Kind of left him stranded there. So we have Banksley, who is to have gone on to leave both his keys and his wallet and his phone inside his house. So Banksley then is to look at his kind of the door opening, the little like mail slot. He like opens that up to realize that his stuff is still inside his home. So he's like, crap. So we have Banksley that is to figure out a way to hotwire his car and get it going, but still. So we even have Patrick that calls Banksley to be like, well, hey man, where are you? So we have Mikey that realizes that Patrick has these golf clubs and these golf balls. It's like, well, hey man, what's that up? What's that for? And so Patrick is like, well, like it's a good thing that you asked. And they're like, no, like we can easily figure it out. It's some golf therapy. And Patrick is like, well, yeah, like it's very comforting to just have these. And so it's like, okay, I see what you're trying to do. So Neil is to go on and tell this story about Vince going in front of a raging bull for his friends. And so we have Vince that is to go on and say it's like, well, like the only reason why I even was to protect you guys is because you had my wallet. So Vince is to go on and whip out his wallet with this big massive hole in it, and he ends up dropping this photo that has a photo of his lover in it, or his ex-lover. So they're like, oh man, I'm sorry that I dropped this photo. And he's like, no, it's okay. So Vince notices out of the window, he realizes at Allie's Grill, which I'm not sure if that's the actual name of this place, but that's the only portion of sign of which that I could read. Vince is to look into the window of that place and is to see all of a sudden this woman is kind of taking these knives and just kind of like slicing them or like sharpening them or just kind of moving them back and forth. In which of a pattern is to, I guess, be like trying to get some kind of sliver of juice or meat or something off of these knives. But either way. So, not quite exactly sure what that visual meant, but maybe it was to kind of like set up something of like, we're going to go on and see that like the guy should be afraid of the women at some point. So, we then go on to have Neil go on and tell the guys, it's like, well, yeah, all you guys are suffering from social gender anxiety. And we have Neil that is to light up this, I think this, like, the cigar or cigarette. But either way, we have the bartender that's like, hey, no smoking in here. And so we have Neil that's like, well, hey, like, there's more men in here than there is women, so you're outnumbered. So we have Neil that wants to state it's like, well, hey guys, like we need to like rediscover our manhood. We need to go on and go to a place where we can kind of pee on a tree and drink till we talk like cavemen and so on and so forth, being very macho and so on and anyways. So we all of a sudden have the driver for these guys show up and she's wondering who Mikey is. And so we have Neil that's like, okay, Candy, or okay, Babe, or whatever. So we have the driver that's like, my name is not Candy. And so it's like, okay, what name do you have? And so she ends up saying Ruth. And he's like, well, I'm going to call you Candy. And so Patrick is to go on and say, like, well, hey, I'm sorry, Candy. Like, we, of course, have Neil here who hasn't yet evolved and isn't to, of course, be a gentleman. So, like, so we have Ruth is like, well, you can just call me Candy. I don't really care. I'm getting paid either way. Is what I would have rashly assumed. So we then go on to have our characters getting to Moodley, and here's where we start to go on and have me start to fade as far as the description goes, but we'll have the cast list anyways. So we have our characters making their way to this bar called the COCK and Balls. So, trying to avoid the censorship of it all here. So, we have our characters like, all right, like, let's head to this bar. And they go on to tell Mikey, like, hey, you need to go on and you need to get to our house to make sure that we're going to have a place to sleep, because more likely these guys are probably going to get so drunk that they probably pass out or black out. So we have Mikey that goes to this house and realizes that there should be a key like waiting for him underneath one of these gnomes. So he's kind of going through all these gnomes to see which one is it that is to have this key, because there's a number of them. And he ends up going to one part of this house that has this fence nearby, and there's this blood smear. It's like, all right, telling us kind of gearing up for what's to happen next. So we have Banksley that is to have his car break down, and so we then turn around to have Banksley, who is to definitely need to go on and get a rental car to still get to this location. So we go on to have the guys make it to the bar, and we have Neil that goes to the bathroom, and is to realize a person in the stall next to him is just consistently barfing it out. Blah, blah, blah. And so Neil is like, what the F is going on there? So he even gets to the point where after he's kind of hearing the commotion, he even goes and kind of looks like kind of underneath the bathroom stall to see all this kind of juice just kind of plopping down. And so he's like, like, looks like somebody's like crapping standing up. So we have Neil that goes back into the bar and talks to the guys, and it's like, well, hey, like, it seems like there's nobody that works in this bar, and Neil's like, well, whoever it is probably the one that's in the bathroom. So we have the guys that decide that they're like, okay, like, let's just kind of make our way out of the store and just kind of do some walking around. We have even Matt at one point, who's to kind of look at this kind of witch store and is to see this kind of unusual item that is in the window. So we all of a sudden see the guys like see this like homeless person, and so like, all right, like we should definitely try to like donate to this girl. Hey, you guys have any money? So they go on and give to this hobo, and come to find out we have the colonel who attacks this hobo, and like, hey, what's going on? So we have Mikey that is to have found this key, and he then all of a sudden notices this zombie that is to be this bride. And so when the zombie gets up, she has this axe, and so Mikey's like, oh my god, this is kind of weird. So Mikey ends up kind of running back to the guys, just very baffled and confused by all of what he is to have noticed here. So we have Vince, who's trying to attack this colonel to get off this homeless person, and the colonel's like, no, 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 you don't know what's really going on. You don't understand. And so we then have the guys who are to slowly but surely understand here. So we have coming out of the woodwork certain zombies, but then we'll start to see more zombies as the movie continues. So, like, at first we go on to see this hairstylist zombie that has had these scissors and them look really cool. And we go on to start to see other zombies, like the hobo girl is actually a zombie. So we were to eventually have Mikey come back, and so he has the bride zombie kind of follow him. So they're kind of all starting to get surrounded by all these unusual zombies. So they're like, okay, like the plan is to like possibly go on and get to the bus. So they scramble to get to the bus, and so what happens is by the time that they make the bus, they realize that now Ruth is to be a zombie. So they're like, okay, like, I guess the bus plan failed. So by the time that they run back into the town, they start to see even more zombies arrive here. So in the Mega Mart, there's to be this girl called Julia that it seems that Mike had kind of hit it and quit it. And so he's like, oh, like, yeah, like I used to be with her, but like it didn't work out. And it's kind of unusual that she now works here. So we also see like the dental surgery that basically just looks like a doctor zombie. So we go on and just start to have all these guys scrambling. So when Patrick was to make it to the bus, he then goes on and is to find the bride zombie. So he climbs up onto this billboard sign and is to just kind of wait it out there because the bride zombie goes and cuts or axes Patrick in the leg, so he just kind of gets up into this billboard sign and is kind of hopefully uh, going to survive this way, but just kind of waiting it out. So we have the rest of the guys who kind of separate in these separate stores. So both Vince and both Matt go into this toy store, and we have Mikey, Neil, and the Colonel that are in this kind of fashion store. So, no. We have Mikey, Graham, and the Colonel going to the fashion store. Neil is to go into this house that he'll realize that eventually he'll regret it. So, we'll get into that. So, we have Vince and Matt that are like scrambling to try to keep this store closed. So we have Vince that quickly grabs this like lightsaber toy and he whips it out and he's like, all right, like we're gonna have to defend ourselves somehow. So we have Vince that is to realize that the hairstylist zombie is to try to get through the door, so he starts smacking her with the lightsaber. So we have Matt that realizes like, oh my god, like here's some like flammable liquid here. So he starts to pour this flammable liquid on the hairstylist's arm, and we have the lighter that lights it on fire, and so the hairstylist just kind of runs off and tries to douse her hand out. So we have Matt that's like, okay, like here's a way that we can kind of use something as a weapon, which is to be this kind of flammable liquid. I think they call it nitrous, and I guess that these things are to be used for these like remote control trucks. So we have at the fashion store, we realize that the guys notice that there's to be a head kind of left by one of the people that worked there, and we also notice that there is some fitting rooms that have zombies in it. So they go on and try to attack the guys. We have the Colonel that shoots one of the zombies and kills him. So it's like, well, hey, like, so you had a gun after all, and the guy's like, well, yeah, I only had one bullet left, but I wanted to save it for like an important moment. I guess that this is important enough. So maybe he was kind of saving it to do himself in, who knows. So we have both Vince and Matt with this plan. So they end up taking this motorized truck and are to have this walkie-talkie attached to it. So they take this truck and push it to the fashion store, and it's like, well, hey guys, like, pick this thing up. So they grab it, and so Mikey starts talking to Vince. Is like, well, hey, do you guys have a plan? And Vince is just like, well, not really. And so like, well, why did you like give us this walkie then? It's like, well, I just wanted to talk to somebody because I can only talk to Matt for so long. So at some point we go to have these guys come up with a plan, and so what Mikey, the Colonel, and Graham decide to do is that they're going to dress as women, dress as drag, to try to get to Matt and Vince. And it seems like that plan worked perfectly. So we have Vince and Matt, that their plan is that they're going to take this motorized truck and put a head on it and kind of take it out to like as far as they can to have the zombies run after it. So that's their master plan. So we go on and have Neil. So let's cover that. So Neil goes into this place and is to find out that somebody is celebrating a birthday. So Neil is to get attacked by this zombie, and she knocks Neil out and then ties him to a chair, and she goes on to consume these fingers that are to be on top of this birthday cake. So we have Neil that's going on and like telling the zombie, it's like just get it over with, just do what you need to do, just like it seems like the way he's kind of talking to her is like some kind of goofy innuendo kind of thing, where it's like she's gonna go on and like sit on him or whatever and just kind of get it over with. So we have the zombie that eventually is to get closer and closer to Neil as he's to back up further into this wall. And so the zombie decides to chop off Neil's pinky and is to take it and to start to consume it. And so we're starting to realize that slowly but surely this girl's going to kind of take Neil piece by piece here, assuming that he's going to die soon. And so we find out that Neil is to grab this cutter away from the zombie and is going to jab it into her neck. And we then have Neil that is to kind of untie himself and get the heck out of there. So we have the guys that are desperately trying to make their way because their master plan is to go on and go to this church. So, because that seems to be like the next possible safe zone, because they were to have gone on and tried to get to Mikey's house, and then they ended up going to the stores. So let's kind of cover that. So we had the guys who all go to Mikey's home, and that's when they go on to have the Colonel explain that the guys are to have all been killed off by all these women, and the women had all become zombies. It's like, well, why did that all happen? And the Colonel's like, well, you're probably thinking that it came from like a food source, or it came from the air or something, and if anything, like, we don't really know. But eventually we have Matt explain when they get to the church that it must have come from the like the way that they like did their clothes, because there was some like biochemical thing from this I think it was either dish soap, or it was some kind of like soap of some kind. It was like a detergent or something. I'm not quite sure exactly, like wording wise, where that was. But so it states, I think, the word biochemical on it. So we have the characters. It always seems that for this movie, we go from them being down at the lower level to then realize that the zombies are coming in, so they have to get to a higher level. So we have our characters get to the higher level of Mikey's house to then realize that they need to like scramble to open up this window to try to get out of the house that way. So we have them like barricading with bookshelves and stuff like that. So we have them get out of this window to get out of this place, and that has them forcibly scramble to these stores. So as we start to see like the dental surgeon and all these kind of things, as they were kind of fighting them off, we had Patrick that was at this billboard sign, and he takes uh, this pipe and these golf balls, and he starts smacking away at all these golf balls to hit all these zombies to help the guys like try to get to these places to kind of hide out. So they all realize that they need to run to the church. So we start to get where the guys are to try to defend themselves to then get to the church, because the motorized truck eventually had like lost its ability to just keep on going, and so we have the zombies that grab the head and start eating at the head. So we even have at one point where Mikey is to go into the slaughterhouse, uh, the meat store, and we have him like realize that there is a uh, a chef in the back that is to be a zombie. So he's like, "Oh my god, all right." So he made a big mistake, and so he kind of pushes back into the outside of things. But so all over the place, I realize it. I'm sorry, but it is what it is. So, meh. So we have the weapon that is to be these squirt guns, as both Matt and Vince are to get these squirt guns and to use this as a flammable liquid to then light them on fire with the slider. So when they get out, both Vince and Matt are to see this witch zombie, and so Vince sprays with this squirt gun, and we then have Matt who's like, all right, like I'm gonna go on and use my weapon to try and kill off uh, this witch. But coming to find out, when Matt starts like kind of using his gun, he realizes that the gun is to light on fire. So they decide that like, well, I guess we're gonna need to just drop this gun on the ground because it is gonna light on fire anyways. So that all of a sudden is to ignite this trail, because Matt had uh, his massive squirt gun that was starting to leak liquid and was to go right back into the toy store and blow it up. So we have them realize, like, okay, like, I guess we just can't go back to the toy store and try to use other accessories in there. So kind of a little bit like God, what was the game? Dead Rising, where we would have like this massive like casino slash toy store. Like it was like all over the place with that movie. Eventually went on to do like films that were just not as like a big of a scale as the actual games were, because of course they couldn't do anything like that. But hey, like the movies were decent enough. But anyways, so from what I saw. So now we push on to have all the guys making their way to the church. And this is, of course, where Banksley comes in and doesn't realize anything about the zombie apocalypse. He's just kind of making his way through this town. And so we come to find out in this church that the politician who's kind of running for office, who is Megnut, is to have worked with the colonel on this plan, and she had been bizarrely been cuffed to this briefcase. So she was to be cuffed, and so she is to try to talk to this to whoever is to listen on the other end of this. But then she finds, like, okay, this isn't the colonel. Like, who are you guys? And so she disconnects the conversation. It's like, well, hey, you were working with this politician. It's like, well, yeah, like we were trying to resolve all this. Basically, they were resolving it by just kill all the zombies and just like, oh, well, like, we're gonna have to just basically kill everyone in this town. So you try to stop this infection from spreading. So we have everybody that's in this area now to try to not have to write everyone off. Because I think Patrick, I think at one point for Patrick, the billboard sign did finally like fall over, and so Patrick had to like mad scramble to get to the church. So like everybody gets to the church, and then I think like Neil is to kind of quickly like through rooftops try to get to the rest of the group at some point. But we'll get to that in a quick second here, or in a minute here, because I have other story to go into. So we all of a sudden realize that the colonel is to get stabbed in the back by shears, and we come to find out that this is to be a grandmother zombie. Come to find out that ends up being Mikey's grandmother. So the colonel gets killed, and so Mikey's like, oh no, I think I have to go on and I have to kill my own grandmother. So Mikey goes on and is to, I think, have these clubs, and so he starts clubbing the grandmother and killing them off. So Mikey's like, well, that was just my grandmother you killed. It's like, well, sorry. And we go on to have like Neil's face, because yeah, like Neil comes back here, and so Neil's just say, it's like, well, hey, you got some blood on you. You should probably clean that up. And so Matt is to kind of like, I guess I do. So they realize that the zombies must be coming from somewhere, as both Matt and Vince are to make their way into a part of this mortuary and kind of look into things to find that the witch zombie is back, and it stabs into Matt as Matt is telling for Vince, like, hey, get out of here, like, save yourself. So Matt dies protecting Vince. So Vince and the rest of the guys go on to try to take down the witch zombie to get revenge on their friend. But then they sort of realize, well, hey, like, if a zombie's already coming in, then like we should try to figure out a way out of here if it seems that there is another exit besides the front door, because the front door is getting like smashed in by the zombie bride with the axe. So they go on to find that the other exit is to just be this nest where all these zombies are. So they're like, okay, well, I guess we're effed that way. So they realize that they again have to go up into the roof of this church. So what happens when they get to the roof of this church is they realize that Banksley has arrived, and he's like, well, hey guys, how's it going? Like, what's going on? And why are you guys on this roof? And they're like, hey, go and get this ladder. And so Banksy's like, okay. So he grabs the ladder and he starts to go up to the roof where all the guys are. And it's like, why would you go on and climb up this ladder? And the guy's like, I don't know. Like, what else could I have done with this ladder, anyways? So they take the ladder and they position the ladder to where they can get to this other building so they can kind of hobble their way to this other building. So what ends up happening is we start to see that the zombies are starting to come in to this building and starting to eventually have, while Graham is to walk by this ladder as most of the group has kind of made it, Graham is to try to make it through this ladder and he falls, and we have the heavier said zombie, even though I don't want to state that. We have her that goes like flying on top of Graham, and we're thinking that okay, she really had a pretty good impact, so maybe Graham is definitely going to be injured or whatever. So we have the guys realize like, okay, well, he's toast, like, let's go on and let's just get out of here. We had Neil that was kind of hopping from rooftop to rooftop, and then he accidentally is to find that one of the roofs is to be like caved in, and so when he falls through this roof, he falls into these girls that are, I guess, in the act of a threesome or a foursome, and maybe they killed their other suitor, I don't know. But so Neil all of a sudden is to be mixed up with all these women, and he's like, well, hey, like, who's going to be first? And then he realizes that all the women are kind of fighting over him, and so he kind of slides away. And so he opens his door. It's like, well, hey, call me. And then he leaves as the women are all fighting over one another. So, but yeah, so Neil gets back with the group and is to kind of be making their way to... I knew this is kind of get confusing, but I'm kind of, in a roundabout way, I'm kind of sticking with certain events because I probably would have been all over the gosh darn place. So again, their goal, their master plan is to think like, well, hey, like, we need to go back to that bus because it's all about the bus. Everyone who tries to go on and get to the bus ends up realizing that it's a stupid idea. So when they go all the way back to the bus, we have them, of course, start to realize like what a mistake that is. So we have Banksley's car that we find out is just some very small, like almost like Volkswagen Bug that won't really even fit, like all the guys. So we have like Patrick that's like, well, hey man, like, I'll just sit on somebody's lap. I don't care as long as we get out of here. And so we have them realize like, no, like, we have to go for the bus now. We have to figure out a way to get everybody like out of the bus, all the zombies and whatever, and just try to take on the bus. So what happens is while they were back at this the Volkswagen little bug car, we had Patrick that ends up getting attacked by the hairstylist zombie, and so she starts to stab into him consistently, and he drops his iPod, and we have one of the like the calming tracks go on, and one of the zombies just kind of crushed the iPod. So we have now Patrick dead. By the time they get to the bus, we have Neil, who is to try to get Ruth and like push her out of the way. We also had one point where Neil was to try, when they were going for the bus one other time, he was to be the one that tried to sucker Ruth out. And by the time that they would go on into the bus, they would realize that there's a number of zombies that are already also in the bus. So they realized what a mistake that was, and so they kind of backed out of it and they ran back out. Of course, I think that's when like the colonel was there and still alive, and so they were trying to go after the bus, but then they realized there was other zombies, so they backed out of that plan and went for the church because where else could they have gone? So we have Neil grab uh, for uh, for Ruth, and we all of a sudden have Vince who's to say Ruth's name, and so Ruth is kind of looking at Vince, and we all of a sudden have Banksley who ends up getting attacked by, I'm assuming, the bartender zombie, and so the bartender ends up stabbing Banksley in the chest with this bottle, and so all of a sudden, like the bottle half starts to fill up with this blood, and then the bottle of the beer opens, the bottle part, and just starts to spew out all this blood, which I thought was a pretty good uh, thing that they did there. So Vince is realizing, okay, Banksley's now dead. So everyone who is really just left at this point just rushes into the truck or into the bus. So I'm gonna like recount how many people are still alive at this point now. So we have Vince, we have Mikey, and we have Neil. So those are the only three that seem to be alive at this point, and weirdly enough, they're also on the poster of this movie. So we have, by the time that these three get into the bus, we have Vince, who is to now state that he's having a midlife crisis, and so he goes on to talk about, like, well, hey, like, if women really want to have a pet, maybe they should just get a Labrador. And so Vince is going on and like telling the guys, is like, well, hey, like, you should really get your lives together. Like, Mikey, you have a good woman, and you're just kind of leaving her to like really like kind of be half in, half out, and like Neil's a womanizer and so on and so forth. So we have Vince that is to take out the photo of his ex-lover and is to burn it. It's like, well, yeah, like I'm definitely gonna move on from this chick. So they get on the bus and they start to drive away, and they're like, well, hey man, what about the barrier? And so we of course have Vince is like, well, hey man, like I'm not any longer gonna mind the rules of the road, because when I was to go on and do something good like that, I of course would just end up here where I was to almost die. So we have Vince that drives off to make it through this billboard sign, and or no. We have him go through all of these like these neighborhood like wood fences, and starts to break through all of them for them to try to get the heck out of there. And so they think that they're free. They're like, oh my god, this is great. And so the guys end up having this walkie-talkie on them. And so, because they no longer have cell phones, because there was this whole scene where the guys were to consistently be getting phone calls, and every single one of the guys' cell phones all had the same ringtone for some goofy reason. And so, like, Vince was getting a phone call from his ex, and his ex was like, well, hey, like, why aren't you signing these papers? And he's like, well, hey, like, I will sign these papers after the weekend. And we all of a sudden have Mikey, who's getting a phone call from his woman, and so on and so forth. And so we had Neil, who's like, okay, you guys all have to dump your cell phones into this bag, and you're going to thank me later. So that's why they don't have cell phones. They had to write it into the story of how they didn't have cell phones. I'm like, oh, okay, of course. So we have Mikey that is to have the walkie-talkie, and so Graham is telling the guys that he's still alive, but he's at the nest now. And Vince is like, well, hey, like, we're not going to leave a live guy behind, so we're going to come back for you. So the guys go on and find where Graham is, which of course he's at this church. So we have Graham, who is to figure out how to have charged that weapon. The colonel was to state was to be this weapon who was to kind of stop the zombies dead in their tracks. So we have the guys that are realizing that they're gonna slowly but surely get uh, like all these zombies like kind of coming at them. So they use this weapon against the zombies, and so it all of a sudden has them just kind of start and stop. It's like red light, green light. So they hit the button, and so they're just kind of stopped in their pose. So Neil just kind of plays around with it, and so he plays around with it so often, and then he like chucks it to one of the guys like, hey man, play around with this. And they accidentally break the device, and then that breaking the device forces the zombies like, okay, like we can now go on and attack these guys. So they're like, oh crap. So they had Graham who was put in this cart, and so all of them were to be kind of rushing to get back to the bus to get the heck out of there. So that, of course, is to be the way that this movie is to end. So with that said, I think I'm going to go on and try to get out of here. I don't think there was any other moment that I had possibly forgotten about, but I'm sure that there will be. So let me know in the comments below if there was. With that said, surprising I was being able to get this from under an hour. But I know that this movie is an hour and 20 minutes, so I was kind of hoping to kind of get underneath that hour. There might have also been several scenes of which that I didn't go on and fully explain, so I apologize. There was quite a bit of times where I kind of went back to certain things that I forgot or didn't quite cover until so on and so forth, minutes, whatever. But anyways, thank you for going on and watching this. Thank you for going on and listening to me. I really do appreciate it. And so with that said, to go on and find another goofy and odd and weird movie at some point. So with that said, let me know in the comments below how you felt about Doghouse. So goodbye everybody. Bye bye.